Hi everyone, a couple of months ago I filmed a video where I answered as many of your ridiculously specific book recommendation requests as possible. I asked you to send them to me in advance, so it was things like, can you recommend a lesbian romance set in a haunted house in the 1950s? I don't think anything was as extreme as that, but you get the idea. And then I set a timer for 15 minutes and I went through them. I hadn't looked at them in advance and I answered as many as I possibly could. I think I answered 19 requests and recommended about 30 books for those requests. So today I'm going to try and beat that. I asked you to send me your very specific book recommendation requests again on Instagram, and I'm going to go through them now. I'm not going to run between my shelves picking the titles up, but I will insert the covers here and I will list the titles in the description box down below. This is a challenge not only because I'm trying to think on the spot, but also I'm filming this video in one take because it's a timer. So I'm gonna try and not fall over my words, but apologies if I do. Also, added drama, my phone is really low on battery, which I've just realized right now. So hopefully that won't die because that would be really awkward. Okay, great. So let's start a timer. Hey Siri, start a timer for 15 minutes. Okay, it's going. Okay, right. Okay, Instagram. Okay, right. Okay, someone said, can you recommend a read that finds comedy in Britishness? A bit like This Green and Pleasant Land by Ayisha Malik. So I read that recently. It is extremely funny. And I think that Bernardine Evaristo is really good at doing a similar thing where she dissects Britishness and what that means and the really difficult topics that come with that, as well as making it funny. So in Girl, Woman, Other, she explores a lot of that. The same in Mr. Loverman. I would also recommend Museum of You by Carys Bray, which is a working class family, I was going to say drama, it's not really a drama, but a novel that's set on one particular street and she looks at different characters who live on that street, and I think it explores similar themes as well. Can you recommend a book exploring non-binary identity? I would recommend poetry by Danez Smith, who is genderqueer. Their collections, Don't Call Us Dead and Hiromi, are brilliant. Someone said, let's find another one. A magical realism book about sisters or family. The Gloaming by Kirsty Logan is about family and about sisters, and it does have magical realism elements. So in that world, when you grow up and get old, you turn to stone on the cliff tops, which is a beautiful image that I have not forgotten since I read that book. Can you recommend a book with a spooky Halloween setting with trans characters? I would recommend Pet by Akwaeke Emezi, which I read recently. They are non-binary, and in this book, Jam, the main character, is trans. Now, we need books which discuss being trans and what that means for that particular character, but we also need books where a character just happens to be trans, and that's the case here. So you asked for a spooky Halloween setting. I would say it is spooky. It's set in a world where monsters don't exist anymore, but then a creature called Pet comes out of Jam's mother's painting, comes to life, and says that there is a monster and that they have to go and find it and fight it. It's a brilliant book which I would recommend for anyone ages maybe 13 up, and I would recommend it for adults too. I think it's great. A book that feels like you were in a dream. Einstein's Dreams by Lightman is all about dreams. It's about Einstein coming up with his theory of relativity. So he's having lots of different dreams where time materializes in strange ways, and it's whimsical and ethereal and just bizarre. Female-authored short story collections with beautiful writing set outside of Europe and North America. Picnic in the Storm by Yukiko Motoya has this brilliant magical realism elements to it, and so does People in My Neighbourhood by Hiromi. It's Speaking of Japanese fiction, someone said Japanese translated fiction with convenience store woman vibes. So Convenience Store Woman is by Sayaka Murata, and her new novel Earthlings is coming out this month. I read it earlier this year. It is even more bizarre than Convenience Store Woman and pushes those boundaries of what it means to be human and what we do when we are hurt and when we want to distance ourselves from what humanity means. I don't want to say more than that because spoilers, but yeah, I mean, that maybe is a cop-out because I'm recommending another book by her, but it is coming out this month. So yeah, go there. Another one, someone said a poetry collection like Blue Horses by Mary Oliver, but with less or no religious imagery. I would recommend poetry by Sharon Olds or Alice Oswald, because both of them write about and very personal things, but linking in with nature, which I assume is what you're looking for. I'd also recommend Barbara Kingsolver's latest collection, which is called How to Fly in 10,000 Easy Lessons, which I would say is similar in tone as well. Historical fiction where the main theme is art, similar to The Doll Factory, which is by Elizabeth O'Neill. I would recommend books by Tracy Chevalier, particularly Girl with a Pearl Earring, but there are other books of hers that look at different kind of art forms, such as tapestry and embroidery. A woman at a crossroads in her life who must make a difficult decision that will affect her future. Okay, well, at the moment, I'm reading Life After Life by Kate Atkinson, which is not about a character who really knows that she's taking lots of different decisions which will alter the course of her life, but it's a novel where she lives again and again. She can't exactly remember living beforehand, but it kind of explores all of the different ways her life could have gone if she had made different decisions at different points in time, and it's fascinating. Oh, this is really weird. Someone said something with a similar feel to Life After Life by Kate Atkinson. Okay, so as I said, that is a book about a woman who's living her life again and again. Jenny Erpenbeck's End of Days is about a woman who goes through 5 different lives. And then there's a book by Claire North, which is called The First 15 Lives of Harry August, or The Last 15 Lives. I think it's The First 15 Lives of Harry August. Yeah, so those are also books where characters live again and again, which is why it's taken me so long to get to Life After Life, because I read those books and then I kind of wanted to take a break from that kind of theme because it's very specific. Fiction set in the 70s, please. How It Was by Janet Ellis is set in the 70s and also the present day. It's a woman who's looking back at her relationship with her daughter and some questionable things that she did, such as reading her diary, and that led her to find out stuff she shouldn't particularly know, which led her to make decisions on things that she maybe should not have made. A book that examines the relationship between marriage and feminism, Night Waking by Sarah Moss, completely does that. Set on an island where a woman, I think she has a toddler, and she's trying to work, but she's moved to this island because her husband is working on the wildlife there, and his work is deemed more important. So she's talking about her own work, but also marriage and motherhood and all of the complicated emotions that come with those things. An atmospheric short novel set in a remote place or island with maybe some magic. Follow Me to the Ground by Sue Rainsford, I read a month or so ago, which is set in a remote Irish, well, it's set outside of a village, it's set on a farm, and it's about a father and daughter who aren't really human, but they take human forms in order to make the locals not be suspicious of them. And it's through these forms that they are able to help heal the local people, but it really balances that discussion when it comes to healing and not erasing disability. So yeah, I talked about that in a recent wrap-up if you want to go and find out my in-depth thoughts on that. Fiction that features swimming in some way. I can think of non-fiction, Turning by Jessica J. Lee, or Swimming at the Pond, which is a non-fiction book about the Hampstead Ladies Pond. There's Topics of Conversation by Miranda Popke, which I have not read, but it is on my shelf, and it has a swimming pool on the cover, so I assume it must be about swimming in some way. I think it's about a woman's relationships with different women throughout her life. Someone said something like English Animals by Laura Kay. I would love to find a book like English Animals by Laura Kay. Books that discuss Englishness and class and xenophobia, I would say There But Further by Ali Smith, The Bass Rock by Evie Wilde. Pew by Catherine Lacey doesn't discuss Englishness because it's set in America, but it is about an outsider who comes in and how that person is judged. And I haven't read Melissa Harrison's novels yet, but I kind of feel like they will have a similar vibe. There's just something in me that feels that. A book about finding your creativity when you can't create, The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. Creepy gothic stories, nothing popular, hidden gems, please. Broken Things by Patricia Tarrant, which has a story in about a knife that follows a young girl around trying to protect her. And also has an old woman who can hear her mother talking to her from the cupboard. I remember that being quite creepy. What is that? I don't know what that is because it's not my phone that's making that noise. It's a different timer. What timer is that? Very confusing. If Lungs by Florence and the Machine was a book, okay, I'm thinking of two things and I'm not even really sure why I'm thinking of these things, but for some reason it makes me think of Coming of Age, probably because it came out, I think, the summer that I left university, and I remember listening to it a lot then. So maybe Submarine by Joe Dunthorne, maybe that even came out around that year, and maybe it was in the trailer and that's why I'm thinking of that. But that is a book about a boy who's coming of age and, you know, falling in love with a girl for the first time, and he's got quite a strange family. Yes, and for some other reason, I want to recommend Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi, which is a graphic memoir about growing up in Iran. And she falls in love with music, and she likes to dance around to it, blasting in her ears at home. And for that reason, I want to recommend these two and them linking together. I don't know if those are bizarre. Maybe later I will look back on those recommendations and question them, but that's what I'm feeling in my heart right now. Books with relationships between a protective dad and his daughter. I recently read Darling by Rachel Edwards, which is a book about a nurse called Darling who meets a man called Tom the night of the EU referendum, and he sees her being harassed by people who are being racist to her, and then they go out on a date, but she already has a son and he already has a daughter, and it's about the relationship really that she primarily has with his daughter, and you hear from both of their perspectives, and that dual perspective was really interesting, actually. Can you recommend a novel or a collection of stories similar to The Other World It Whispers and Salt Slow? So The Other World It Whispers is by Stephanie Victoire and Salt Slow is by Julia Armfield. And both of those authors have stories in Outsiders, which is a collection of stories, it's an anthology, and I have a story in that. And they deal with similar themes to the things that you would find in all three of our books. So female-female relationships and the gothic and the weird and magical realism. So if you haven't checked out that anthology, I would very much recommend checking that out. An unlikable narrator in their 20s who is somehow relatable. An unlikable narrator in their 20s who is somehow relatable and inspiring. I mean, I want to say Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney, but I don't think that they are inspiring at all. But they're definitely unlikable. Maybe Mrs. Gaskell and Me by Nell Stevens, which gives me similar vibes to Sally Rooney. So if you like her writing, I think you'll like hers, but I think her characters are slightly more likable. It's a weird genre mixture book where it's autofiction in that she's writing about herself, writing her PhD about Mrs. Gaskell, and she's also writing about what that PhD entails, and talking about her relationship with a man called Max, who she met in Paris, if I haven't made that up. And that love story and how she kind of relates that to Mrs. Gaskell's love story because she met someone that she fell in love with in Rome. Yes, but they're not particularly likable because they keep on making ridiculous decisions, but at the same time you kind of empathise with what they're doing. I don't know if I would call it inspiring, but definitely more likable and inspiring than Sally Rooney's characters. Can you recommend a mystery set in 2 time periods in English, Irish or Scottish countryside? Why couldn't I say that word? Scottish countryside that isn't by Tana French. A book that has just come out and I'm so excited to read is, what's it called? It's over there. After the Silence by Louise O'Neill, which is set, I believe, in a remote area of Ireland. And I don't know if it's dual timeline, but I think it's partly set 10 years after the initial crime. And it's about a documentary team who are coming to the scene of a murder 10 years later, trying to investigate and find out what happened. And she said it was heavily inspired by the podcast West Cork, which is one of my favourite podcasts of all time. If you haven't listened to it, it is about a murder in Ireland and a podcast team go and investigate. And I was going to say it seems like it's going to be straightforward. It doesn't, but it just becomes so complex and ridiculous characters who are real life people. It was so bizarre listening to it. So I'm really excited to read her book. That's the end. That's the end of 15 minutes. But I was also going to say Tom Vola's book, What Lies Within, which is also set across 2 timelines and is about a family dynamic and a crime that happened in the past. And I was so impressed with the way that Tom researched and wrote about violence against women in that book. I don't think I've really ever read a book written by a man that had dealt with it in such a way. It was really respectful. He had obviously done, as I said, a lot of legwork. And yeah, I was very impressed. So that's the end of the 15 minutes. I have recommended as many books as I could in that 15 minutes. I'm not sure how many I recommended. Let me put it on the screen. I feel like I recommended, like, answered more requests than 19, but maybe I didn't. Maybe it was a similar amount. We shall see. Let me know if you have read any of these books. I will do another one of these in the future because they're always a challenge and I do enjoy a challenge. As I said, I will list the titles that I mentioned in the description box down below. And if you have any recommendations that would fulfill one of these requests that are different to the ones that I said, do leave those in the comment section below as well. And if you have any bizarre requests, welcome to leave them in a comment as well. And I'll answer them in a comment if I can, or I'll save them for another video when I do something like this. I hope you're all having a good week and I will speak to you very soon. Lots of love. Bye.